Hello, my name is Ricardo Gonzalez. I'm the product manager for Zero Downtime Migration, engine that powers your migration to the Oracle Cloud and to Exadata on premises. Today I'm going to be talking about our latest release, 21.3, which was released in March 2022. We're going to be talking about the overall aspects of cloud migration, how Oracle is working to help you in your cloud journey, and what we have to offer with ZDM and the overall encompassing technology that we use for your cloud migration journey. Here you can see today's agenda. We're going to have a really quick introduction on the Oracle Database Cloud Migration General Overview, Cloud Services, and then talk about what we have in place for technologies into how to migrate to our cloud. And then we're going to focus specifically on Zero Downtime Migration, which is the main engine that powers your cloud migration. Then I'm going to share some resources of ZDM and where you can find more information. So when we talk about cloud migration, there are three stages that are really important to take into consideration. First is an assessment and evaluation of your situation, whether it's a manual assessment of your overall sources, target, what are you doing, what are the plans for your migration, or you can also use our tools. We have a tool called CPAD, which is a cloud migration, pre-migration advisor that will help you when you're doing logical migration and assess your database regarding data pump and Golden Gate configurations. Now you also have to choose a product. Oracle has two products for cloud migration. The main engine is Zero Downtime Migration, or ZDM. It has different workflows, physical, logical. You can download it and have it running on your premises. And that engine also powers the Database Migration Service, which is a UI native tool that runs on OCI natively and can help you with some migrations for some specific targets and with the logical workflow. Finally, then, of course, once you have done all this work, you'll start the actual migration process and your cloud journey into the Oracle Cloud. So let's start with the overall view of Oracle Zero Downtime Migration, or ZDM. When the product was created, we thought of making it as simple as possible. So the product gathers all the requirements for your migration, all the information that you provide to us for the migration, and then performs the cloud migration, meaning moving your database from on-premises to the Oracle Cloud. And as simple as possible as we can provide, of course. Then we leverage Oracle MAA, or Maximum Availability Architecture best practices. And the product is fully MAA compliant. We provide a secure and zero data loss way for you to move your database to the Oracle Cloud. And we also provide a free way for you to move the Oracle database to the Oracle Cloud. Because of course, ZDM, even though it's a product, it has a license and it's fully supported, it's free. There's no charge for it. Regardless if you're using a physical migration or a logical migration approach, it doesn't matter which products you're using that are part of the ZDM automation, it's free and we don't charge you for the use of it, which is really important and we're really happy and proud about that. ZDM is a downloadable binary. It's around 800 megabytes. You download it on a compute node in OCI, on a VM on your premises. As long as it has Oracle Linux 7, we're good with it. It's really simple to install, deploy, then configure, and provide access to the source and target databases from within it. And then it will take care of orchestrating the migration from on-premises to the cloud or to Exadata on-premises. And it's highly customizable because it has a file called response file, unique for each migration, in which you will add parameters pertaining to your specific migration job. So source database, target database, methodologies, etc. So basically it's a really simple tool that once configured properly will orchestrate your whole migration. So how does Zero Downtime Migration work? Well, first of all, the approach is simple. We do a single button approach. And the way we do this is that when you install ZDM, you'll find that there's a file called response file. This file, which you can create for each one of your migrations, has really important information. Basically, migration methodology, source, target, backup, location and type of backup, and some fine-tuning regarding the different aspects of your migration. So once you have fulfilled all of the requirements and have pre-filled this response file appropriately, you just issue a command in ZDM or Zero Downtime Migration. It will read the response file, look for to check that everything is in place and properly set up, and then we'll migrate the database for you. So of course, single button approach, simple and really convenient. Also, the product, as mentioned before, is super comprehensive. It's MAA compliant, meaning maximum ability architecture compliant. You can pause and resume the migration if you want at some time. You could also start the migration by saying, I want you, once you reach this phase, please pause, and then I can do some testing and then continue. It offers a dry run option, which means you can do an evaluation of a migration, meaning you can migrate without migrating. Basically, it's just, I want to see what happens if I migrate, do some testing, but not actually migrate my data. So that's what the dry run or evaluation mode is. It also offers automated encryption. So if your source database is not encrypted, it doesn't matter. We will encrypt it in the target by default, because that's what it's, the default at the Oracle Cloud. It's TD enabled databases. But if the source is not TD enabled, that's completely fine. Now, we offer a centralized way to handle all of your migrations. You can schedule migrations by saying, I want to migrate my database Saturday at 4 in the morning. So ZDM will do that. We offer a comprehensive audit trail, so a lot of logs for you to then do auditing and reviewing. You can do many migrations in parallel. So you issue one migration command for one database, then another one for another database with a different response file, etc. So you can have many migrations happening at the same time, and ZDM will take care of that for you. So let's talk now about the architecture of Zero Downtime Migration. Now, bear in mind, there's 2 slides I will be sharing with you today regarding architecture. This one that covers overall architecture for physical migration, and the next one, which we'll be talking about architecture for logical migration. Now, they're both pretty much the same, but when we talk about logical migration with ZDM, there's a couple of extra components. So we'll talk about those in next slide. But right now, let's focus with what we have here. So first, we have the ZDM service node. That's where ZDM will be running. It could be a VM or any server. It could be deployed in the source server if you wanted to. It could be deployed in the cloud, in a compute node. It could be deployed in target. As long as it has a dedicated environment, it doesn't share a cluster or home, and it's running on Oracle Linux 7, we're fine. We don't require a lot of processing or capacity for the service node. Nothing fancy, nothing special. Now, we have the on-premises source database, which is your Oracle database that you're going to be migrating. Then we have the target database cloud service, which could be DBCS virtual machines, Exadata cloud service, Exadata cloud customer, and of course, if you want, you can also migrate to Exadata on-premises with ZDM. Then the backup location, if you're migrating to a Oracle Cloud Infrastructure-based database, then that backup location can be the object store. But if you're migrating to Exadata on-premises or Exadata Cloud Customer, the backup location, of course, will be NFS or the recovery plans. And of course, we have network connectivity because we have to be sure that ZDM can connect to the source database, the target database, backup location, etc. Now, as I mentioned in my previous slide, the architecture for logical migration is pretty much the same. So we have the same components as the ZDM service node, the on-premises source database, the target database, backup location, and network connectivity. But there's 2 extra components, right? There's a way to do a direct migration with logical migration in ZDM, which will leverage database links. So there's the possibility, and hence they enter into the picture as part of the overall architecture. But if not, you can still use a backup location when you're migrating with logical migration with ZDM. Now, if the migration, the logical migration, it's an online migration, ZDM will then leverage Golden Gate, and we'll deploy a Golden Gate hub in OCI using a specific image from the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Marketplace. This Golden Gate image has a specific licensing which can be used for 183 days, and then, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, there's no charge, which is amazing, right? So you have that there. You can do logical migration with ZDM, and this new component, which is the Golden Gate Hub, allows for that online migration to happen. And that's overall a view of how the architecture will look like in a logical migration scenario. Now let's talk a bit about features and functionality for zero downtime migration. From source perspective, we can migrate standard edition and enterprise edition databases on premises, 11G204, 12C, 18C, 19C databases, and also we can migrate databases that are residing in AWS RDS. We have different ways of migrating your databases. It could be a physical workflow, as explained before, and we'll go more in detail soon. Also logical migration for Linux databases. And then for AIX and Solaris sources, we only support the logical migration workflow. Now we can migrate to different targets. So with ZDM, you can migrate to Database Cloud Service, to Exadata Cloud Service, to Exadata Cloud Customer and the Autonomous Database, either Autonomous Transaction Processing or Autonomous Data Warehouse. And also, really important, you can do both physical and logical migration to Exadata on premises. Now, when you're using ZDM to migrate your databases to the cloud or to Exadata on premises, you can do non-CDB to CDB conversion. That happens both for the physical and the logical workflow. We have, as mentioned before, two different methodologies, physical and logical. You can also perform an in-flight upgrade, so moving the database from 11.204 to 19C, for example, from on-prem to the cloud. This is, of course, only available on the logical workflow, not via physical migration. And there are several technologies that we use. So for physical migration, we rely on Armen and DataGuard, and for logical migration, we rely on DataPump and Golden Gate. For the longest time, we've been working on ZDM development. It's been quite a history of evolution of the product. Our first release came in November 2019 with physical migration workflow support only, limited targets, and only Linux sources. We then released 19.7 in October the next year with several enhancements to the overall usage of the product and features and functionality. Then a year later, in March 2021, we released 21C, which included logical migration to Exadata on premises, autonomous database as a target, CDB conversion, the CPAD or migration advisor support, and of course a lighter ZDM home. Then we released 21.2 in August that year, including sources from AWS, including logical offline support for Solaris and AIX, direct data transfer support, and a lot of other enhancements and customizations on the ZDM end. And we keep on growing. So the growth continues, and in March 2022, we announced Zero Downtime Migration 21.3 with support for standby databases as the initial source, at least for the backup creation or data transfer mechanism at first during the physical migration, full DataGuard broker support and integration with the migration, new OCI targets for AWS RDS sources, full logical online support for cross-platform migration coming from AIX and Solaris sources, also including logical migration to Exadata on premises, and further enhancements and customization for your overall migration experience. So we try to keep up and release as much as we can and evolve the product so that we can always bring and enhance your cloud migration journey. Having introduced Zero Downtime Migration and the overall cloud migration overview for Oracle, let's talk now about our two main methodologies for migration, physical migration and logical migration. I'm going to start with the physical workflow. Now, before talking about ZDM physical migration specifically step by step and how it works, I want to properly discuss supported sources and targets, right? So first of all, source versions. You can migrate 11.204 onwards, so Oracle databases 11.204, 12.1, 12.2, 18, 19C, etc. And then the same targets. But it's really important to understand that when you're doing physical migration, the source has to be the same as the target, meaning the same level for the version of the database. So if you're migrating from 11.204 database, you have to migrate to 11.204 database. If you're migrating from a 12.1 database, you have to migrate to 12.1 database, from a 19 to 19, etc. What can change is the patch level. So it doesn't matter if the patch level on the target is higher. What ZDM will do is it will run data patch at the end and iron out any details that need to be corrected. Now, before, you only could migrate from a non-CDB, non-container database, to a non-container database, or from a container database to a container database. This is not the case anymore. ZDM now allows for non-CDB to PDB, or pluggable databases, migration. And with the physical workflow, there's a bit of an offline, when during the conversion, once you have migrated database, we perform a plug-on-plug operation, but we have that in support now, which we didn't have that before for physical migration. Now, what platforms can you migrate to? You can migrate to Database Cloud Service Virtual Machine. You can migrate to Exadata Cloud Service. You can migrate to Exadata Cloud Customer. And of course, if you're doing a hardware refresh project and you're migrating, you have new Exadatas on premises, you can also use ZDM to migrate your Oracle databases to the new Exadatas. Now, ZDM physical migration has two ways of working. One, it's an offline migration, which has one specific flavor for the migration. And then you have physical online migration, which has two different ways of working. Let's talk first about physical offline migration. Physical offline migration supports Oracle Standard Edition databases and Oracle Enterprise Edition databases. It basically uses a backup and restore mechanism in which ZDM leverages RMAN to create a backup of the database, transfer the backup files to a backup location, instantiate a target database, and then performs the switch over. Whereas with physical online migration, you have different ways of working. First of all, yes, it will also leverage RMAN, or the recovery manager, but also it will leverage DataGuard to provide a full synchronization of the source database and the target database. Now, ZDM can either transfer backup files to a backup location, as the same as it would do with the physical offline workflow, or you can use a direct data transfer as mentioned before. So that's also that difference. Now, it's important to understand that the online migration for physical, it's only available for Enterprise Edition databases. So now let's actually talk about how ZDM would work for physical online migration using a backup location. And I'll go and talk about it on a step-by-step fashion. So I'm going to explain specifically how it works on a step-by-step. Now I'm going to explain how it works on a step-by-step basis, from the download of the product all the way to the finalization of the migration. So the first step, of course, is to download ZDM. You can do so by going to ZDM's product website, www.oracle.com/go-to/ZDM. You'll download ZDM on the server node where you were going to be running ZDM. As I mentioned before, the requirements are, minimum. We just want to have Oracle Linux 7 running there and some other minimum requirements. You can see more in our documentation, which you can find in the same website where you can download ZDM. Now, once you have downloaded ZDM, install the product and configure it, remember I talked about the response file, which is a file that has information on the migration type, backup location, source database, target database, etc. So you're gonna configure that response file and pre-fill it with the proper information. In this case, you're gonna tell the response file that we will be doing physical online migration. Talk about the source database on premises, target database, etc. Once that information is in place, you can start the migration process, which comes next. So you issue the migration command. Remember that ZDM runs on a command line based tool. So basically you will say ZDM CLI migrate database. That's the name of the command line interface and the migration command. You provide information about the response file, information about the source and target database, and ZDM starts the migration process. So here, everything that happens now is completely automated and orchestrated by ZDM. First, it will connect to the source database and the target database in the cloud via SSH connectivity, and we'll be sure that everything is in place. So basically, databases are from the same version, we're good to go, all secure, proper connectivity can be established, etc. So if it's good to go, then Zirium will start the migration process and continue. And how does Zirium continue? Well, it'll then start creating the backups I mentioned, the L0 and L1 backups from the primary database on premises, and we'll start a connection between that primary database and the backup location of your choice. In this case, let's pretend we're migrating to Exadata Cloud Services. So this backup location will be a bucket of object store or object storage in your cloud tenancy. Now, Zirium starts the orchestration of transferring those backup files from the primary database on premises to the backup location in the Oracle Cloud. Once the transfer of the backup files has been finalized, Zirium will use those backup files on the backup location and instantiate a standby database in the cloud. So this is great because now you have two databases. You have your primary database on premises, which still has a running workload. The application is connected to that primary database, but you also have a standby database in the cloud. Of course, that database is created out of a backup, so it's not fully in sync, but that is what comes next and the next step for Zirium. So, in order to provide synchronization between the primary database and the target database in the cloud, which is now a standby database, Zirium will leverage DataGuard. And in order to do so, what Zirium does is it establishes SQLnet connectivity between the primary database and the standby database and starts the synchronization process. Now, you could actually pause here the migration if you wanted to. There's even a way to start the migration and at that moment tell Zirium when you arrived in this phase or some other phases if you want to, please pause. So then you can do all the testing you want on the standby, be sure that everything is fine before any switch over, before any role swap of the databases. So you could pause here if you wanted to, and if not, Zirium will continue the process by, of course, synchronizing the database and then proceeding with the migration. That's up to you. Now the next step, of course, is for Zirium to perform a switch over. So now the application is pointing to the cloud and a role swap. So now the source database is now a standby database and the target database in the cloud is a primary database. This is great. And you could actually configure Zirium to leave the configuration this way when it finishes up and cleans up. Or Zirium will continue its work and then perform a proper cleanup, stop connectivity between source, target, etc. But bear in mind the following, right? All databases in the cloud have transparent data encryption or TD by default, whereas not necessarily all the source databases will have this. So if you want to keep up, a DR configuration, disaster recovery, in which you have a DataGuard configuration set up, in which you have the primary database in the cloud and standby on premises, you need to be sure that your on-premises database is then TD enabled or transparent data encryption enabled. And as you know, these of course has implications. You need to get the advanced security license, but also when databases are 11.2 and 12.1, TD enabling them, so transparent data encryption enablement, it's an offline operation. If they're 12.2 or higher versions, then it's an online operation. So it's important you take all of these considerations in mind when performing the migration if you want to keep up a communication between the new cloud database and your deployment on premises. Finally, Zirium will then, once the synchronization is in place, the switchover and the role swap is in place, Zirium will proceed to finalize the migration. That means proper cleanup of source and target environments, all the connections and connectivity that was required, and then exit gracefully. And then you will have your application connected to a primary database in the cloud, and you have successfully migrated your database using Zirium physical online migration. Having covered all that is to be covered about physical migration, now let's move and talk about zero downtime migration, specifically the logical migration workflow. And just as we did for physical migration, before going into the different architecture and step-by-step scenarios for logical migration, let's talk about the supported sources and supported targets. So logical migration in ZDM allows for source versions 11.204 onwards and targets 11.204 and higher as well. A big difference here is that you can actually migrate cross version, or meaning you can perform an in-flight upgrade. What does that mean? It means that if you are on 11G, you can actually migrate to 19C, or if you are in 12C, you can migrate to 19C. So basically you can migrate to a higher target version if you want to. Also, we perform non-CDB to PDB conversion, so you have that option as well with logical migration. Now, target platforms, of course, Database Cloud Service, Autonomous Database, Exadata Cloud Service, and Exadata Cloud Customer. One thing that I want to remind, even though I already talked about at the beginning, is that with logical migration, you can migrate databases that are, the source is in Linux, or the source is in AIX or in Solaris. And also logical migration allows for migrating Oracle databases that are running on AWS, Amazon Web Services, on RDS, into the autonomous database as well. So logical migration offers a wide array of sources and targets and combinations for your migration. Zero downtime migration, logical migration offers two different workflows within the logical methodology. You can do logical offline migration. Basically, it uses data pump, and what it does is it uses an export import mechanism for exporting data pump dump files to a backup location, or to doing a direct connection with database links, and then doing an import on the target when you're instantiate a new database, and then ZDM will perform the switch over. Now, there's also the logical online migration, which allows for data pump and Golden Gate as well. And while using Golden Gate, this allows for an online way of migrating your database, because you use data pump export import, but then the synchronization happens with Golden Gate. All of these, of course, orchestrated and synchronized by ZDM. And each one of these, of course, have different, features and functionality and different ways of working. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the logical online migration with data pump, Golden Gate, and a backup location, which is the most common use case for logical migration. So I'm going to go step by step and explain and share with you how does it work. Now, logical online migration in zero downtime migration, ZDM, uses Golden Gate, right? And as you remember, I mentioned that ZDM is free, and as well as the associated technologies. Well, this happens to be true also for Golden Gate. We offer in the Oracle Cloud Marketplace a specific image called Oracle Golden Gate for Oracle Database Migrations, which allows you to use Golden Gate for, I think it's around 183 days. You can see the up-to-date terms of use at the OCI Marketplace. And it deploys a compute node with a Golden Gate hub with 2 microservices, an Exadata and a Replicat for OCI-based migrations. From there, you can download a Docker container where you can actually deploy an on-prem G hub for Exadata Cloud customer migrations. And that Docker container, when you split it up, has an image that works for specifically that use case, right? Migration to Exadata Cloud customer. Now, for logical only migration to Exadata on-premises, you also can use Golden Gate, but you do require to bring your own license. So there's no exception, or there's no usage granted when you're migrating to Exadata on-premises, when migrating with ZDM, with a logical workflow, and using Golden Gate. Now, before starting the step-by-step overview of the online migration with backup application for ZDM logical methodology, I'm going to also talk about the architecture, because this has the Golden Gate hub, and I think it's important to talk about the different components of the migration. So I'm going to do it next. Here we have an overall diagram on how ZDM logical online migration with the back application would work. So let's see each one of the components. We have the ZDM service node. We have then the on-premises source database and the target database in the cloud. ZDM connects to both, of course. Then we have the source database that connects to the back application, and it will use data pump for the export import of the database dump files. And then of course the back application is connected to the target database because it's in the in customer's tenancy in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure deployment. Now also we have compute Oracle Cloud Infrastructure compute node that is running as a Golden Gate hub that has two microservices. One Golden Gate microservice working as an extract, and one Golden Gate microservice working as a Replicat. The extract is connected to the source database, and the Replicat to the target database. They both connect and work together so that the databases can be kept in sync. We also have the application connected to the source database, which of course ZDM will perform the switchover once the migration is finalized to the target database in the cloud. So having covered this, let's talk about specifically how logical online migration with a back application works on a step-by-step basis. The first step, as with the physical migration, is to download and configure ZDM. Same steps apply: downloading ZDM on a VM running Oracle Linux 7, and then configuring the product, and after installation and proper configuration, pre-feeding the response file with all the information regarding the source database, target database, back application, Golden Gate hub, etc. And then issue the migration command so that ZDM will start the migration process. ZDM will proceed to connect to the source database on premises and to the target database in the cloud and perform all the required validations to be sure that it can proceed with the migration. And once those have been fulfilled, ZDM will continue and perform the database migration. ZDM then proceeds to connect to the back application, perform storage sizing considerations and verifications, and then proceeds with the migration process. ZDM then proceeds to configure an Oracle Golden Gate microservice in the Golden Gate hub. This microservice is an extract. What it would do is it'll start capturing transactions from the source database and generating what we call trail files. These files will be stored in the Golden Gate hub and then will be used by the second microservice that will be configured soon to synchronize the database in the target, which is the database that we're migrating. So this is a crucial step that is really important because it will allow ZDM to have an online fashion of migration. Basically, ZDM will provide an online migration by leveraging Golden Gate. And the first step, of course, is this first microservice configuration that will act as an extract. Now, the next step, of course, is for ZDM to start a data pump export job. This happens on the on-premises source Oracle database, where ZDM will start doing this export job that then will be transferred to the back application. And it's really important because those dump files that are generated from the data pump export job will be used to instantiate a target database in the cloud. Now, the next step, of course, is for ZDM to start a data pump import job on the target that will leverage the dump files that were transferred to or exported to the back application to instantiate now a target database in the cloud. But let's step back a second and talk about different targets. If you're migrating to an autonomous database, then this step is exactly as this. ZDM starts a data pump import job at the target database, the autonomous database, and then imports the dump files and instantiates a new database in the cloud. But let's say the target is actually Database Cloud Service or Exadata Cloud Service or Cloud Customer. Then in this case, what ZDM does is that it copies those dump files from the back application to a local file system on the target, and then starts the data pump import job and instantiates the target database. Now with this target database now instantiated in the cloud, the next step is to synchronize it and put it fully in sync with the on-premise database that is our source. So that's what comes next, and I'll explain how it works in the next slide. Now, in order to fully synchronize the source database with the target database, what ZDM does is, of course, it leverages Golden Gate. As I mentioned, we have a Golden Gate hub on the Oracle Cloud, and it uses a specific image from the Oracle Cloud Marketplace, that has a specific license for the usage of migrating your database between on-premises to the cloud when you're using ZDM or the database migration service, which is a product that Oracle also has, and it's powered by ZDM. Now, this Golden Gate hub that has two Golden Gate microservices has one as an extract that is feeding or capturing transactions and all the information from the source database. And now in this step, what ZDM does is it configures another microservice that will act as an Oracle Golden Gate Replicat, which feeds from the extract and applies all the changes to the target database on the cloud. So basically you have now a target database in the cloud that is being synchronized by Golden Gate, and when the synchronization is done and ZDM is ready to continue, what ZDM does is the next step, which is finalize the migration properly by switching over and cleaning everything, which will happen next, and I'll explain in the next slide. So the final step is, of course, for ZDM to perform the switchover. Now you have the target database in the cloud and the application connected to it. It's the full migration fully completed. Then, of course, ZDM will proceed to clean up all the environment, all the connections, all the work done, the Golden Gate hub, etc. So overall, ZDM uses different products as data pump, and then, of course, amazing technology like Golden Gate to perform this online migration with a logical workflow, and then has, of course, now your application connected to the target database in the cloud. So it's a great way of moving your database to the cloud with versatility. It offers the possibility to do, as I mentioned before, in-flight upgrades, so you can migrate an older version of the database to a newer version as well to the cloud, and it uses great technology. So yeah, this is the overview of how logical online migration with a backup location works with ZDM. So, in summary, ZDM is the best-in-class solution for moving your databases to the cloud. ZDM powers the migration to the cloud. Not only is the main engine and product for moving your database to the cloud, it also powers other products in Oracle, like the database migration service. ZDM has a wide array of migration sources. You can migrate databases that are running on Linux, databases that are running on AIX, and databases that are running on Solaris. You can also migrate Oracle databases that are running on AWS, Amazon Web Services, RDS. You can migrate databases from 11.12.4 onwards for the version level, and you have a wide array of migration targets. You can migrate your databases to Database Cloud Service Virtual Machine, to Exadata Cloud Service, to Exadata Cloud at Customer, to Exadata on-premises, and you can migrate your databases to the Autonomous Database, both in Autonomous Transaction Processing and in Autonomous Data Warehouse. You have multiple migration workflows, both physical and logical, either or both of them using offline methodology and an online methodology, depending on your choice and your migration needs. Physical migration leverages the Recovery Manager, RMAN, and DataGuard. Logical migration leverages Data Pump and Golden Gate. We have the best-in-class features and functionality like non-CDB to CDB conversion, the migration advisor, physical direct file transfer, and many more great features within and built in ZDM. And of course, we're cost-effective. ZDM is a cost-effective solution that allows you to migrate your database to the cloud free. There's no cost to use. The product doesn't have a price, which is great, and we provide this and fully support the product for you. Now, before leaving you today, and thank you so much for your time and attention, I want to share with you some resources. Please visit our website, www.oracle.com/go/ZDM, where you can find more information about the product. You can download a product there. You can see all our documentation, not only from our current release, but also for previous releases. You can see step-by-step guides, and I really want you to take time and visit our live lab section and go through the step-by-step amazing workshop that we've created for you with the Live Labs platform, where you can learn and try all the products within the Oracle Cloud family for you with your accounts, and of course with the Algo 3 account that Oracle provides. It's a really good platform for learning more and getting acquainted with ZDM and other Oracle technologies. Thank you. It has been my pleasure to be here with you today, presenting about Zero Downtime Migration. Hope this presentation was useful for you. If you have any questions, please go to our website. We have a lot of information there. And if you want to reach out to me directly, this is my Twitter handle, @ProductManaged. Please, anytime, I'm more than happy to engage and answer any ZDM questions or Oracle questions overall. Thank you so much.